Everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 2022 Global Water Futures Annual Open Science Meeting. As those of you who were with us yesterday can confirm, we had some great speakers and dialogues, and if you missed them, the recordings will be available on the conference platform for you to catch up. I'm Corinne Schuster-Wallace. I'm Associate Director of Global Water Futures and your chair for this morning. I'm joining you from Saskatoon, located on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to the ancestors of this place, because they've stewarded the waters and the land that I depend on for generations. And I encourage you to reflect on the lands and the waters where you are living, working, and enjoying yourselves. Today's theme within Knowledge to Action is water-related risk reduction. As we heard yesterday, water does not exist in isolation. It's connected to all living and non-living things, and it can be impacted by governance and management of other resources such as energy and food. So given these intersecting water-related risks and our need to mitigate them in a changing and uncertain water future, it's my pleasure to introduce a panel of experts to share their perspectives on various dimensions of risk reduction and bridging research and knowledge to policy and practice for the health and well-being of people, animals, and the environment. And so, first person who will be talking to us will be Dr. Steve Burian. He's a professor of hydrology and water resources at the University of Alabama and director of science at the Alabama Water Institute. Ms. Darcy Peter is Gwich'in-Athabaskan from Alaska, and she engages in environmental and social sciences and informing environmental policy. Dr. Fabrice Renaud is a professor of environmental risk and community resilience at the University of Glasgow. And our last speaker for this session is Nadia, who belongs to the Crow clan of the Champagne and Ejiak First Nations and has been engaged in advancing Indigenous water security and co-management in Canada for the past decade. So I'm sure you're just as excited as I am with this great lineup of individuals, and I will hand the floor over now to Steve. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you to the organizers of this annual Open Science meeting for the Global Water Futures for inviting me to join you today. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. In this presentation, what I'm going to do, and I was excited to listen to the introduction and overview from Corinne about about the theme and then the sub-themes. This fits very well with what I'm going to speak about. I'm going to describe the newly established Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology, Research to Operations in Hydrology, abbreviated CIROH, so CIROH. I'll refer to CIROH during the presentation. The presentation, it's a new cooperative institute that's been established by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I'm serving as the executive director. What I'm going to do is describe the research themes, the educational initiatives, and then most importantly, the international partnership with Canada and the Global Water Futures through the University of Saskatchewan and University of Calgary, and give a broad overview of the things that we're proposing to do, hoping to build some mutually beneficial partnerships between CIROH and the Global Water Futures. It was in April, so just 1 month ago was when the award was announced by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the U.S. This is the latest of their cooperative institutes. There's many cooperative institutes around the U.S. that focus on different research areas and research themes. But this one in particular is unique in that it is focused on bridging the research to operations to impact chasm that exists in operational water prediction in the U.S. And in fact, around the world. This is a challenge that we face in terms of how do we take university research and put it into practice. We deal with this as professors and researchers and practitioners all the time. So CIROH is set up in a different way from the other cooperative institutes in that it really is is driving at a linkage and an integrated linkage between academia, the private sector, and the government, and in particular, Operational Line Office of the National Weather Service in the U.S. And so our research from CIROH of the universities involved in the partnerships through those universities will be directly connected to improve operational forecasting and the societal benefits from that forecasting, which is a great fit for the GWF annual science conference theme of knowledge to action. And so I'm excited to present this and hopefully develop some ideas going forward of how we can work together. So NOAA is supporting this consortium. CIROH is a consortium. It's led by the University of Alabama. It consists of at this time, 28 academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, private sector partners. You can see the logo farm there. That is all the people. And this is a powerful team of hydrologic researchers across the US and Canada. There's a little bit of strategy to all of these institutions being involved, and two in particular are important to highlight. One is that across North America, there's a very diverse hydroclimate conditions, and trying to have institutions involved in the consortium that can contribute local hydrologic expertise to cover that spectrum of conditions is what we were after. The other is to build a community of practice. And so by having a large consortium, we can engage a broad community in advancing hydrologic prediction research and driving that into operations, supporting US and Canada operational water prediction in collaboration with Global Water Futures. The vision, this is a very simple thing, that actionable water intelligence at everyone's fingertips. This is really important, especially with relationship to flood forecasting, but equally as important in other sectors related to drought and water quality. In unpacking this a bit, we can see here that CIROH's mission really is to improve forecasts of floods, droughts, and water quality, not only now, but in the future, which aligns very well with the Global Water Futures, to protect people, property, livelihoods, and environment. And so this is aligned with the core mission of the National Weather Service, and in particular the National Water Center. Key will be to align all the research within the consortium and others, forming a synthesis and integration capacity to support the NOAA research and operational water prediction enterprise, and translating that to community resilience, to inform risk, help prevent hazards, and support commerce in that realm. CIROH has not only a short-term but also a longer-term vision. As we look to immediately ramp up, since we're just awarded, we're ramping up rapidly this year, but we have a long-term vision of how we can grow towards a wide range of needs and dynamic needs of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, specifically around building within the framework of the next-gen national water model. Now, I'm excited to show this figure because it comes from the Louise Arnell from the University of Saskatchewan, and we're working with Martin Clark, and this really captures, it probably fits well with Global Water Futures as well, but it fits perfectly for the Cooperative Institute for Research Operations and Hydrology. And there's an integration of three key things: the domain science, the hydrologic science, computer science, and then data science. And the three of these being driven by government, industry, and academia partnership to be able to, looking in the middle there, create the science for society. And so it really captures the message of what the key domains are that we're integrating, the key players or actors in that integration, and then what the point is in the middle of science for society. This gives some idea of the types of things that we're going to be focusing on here. In the main goals, I just want to highlight the audiences that we're targeting. The first is the National Water Center in the United States. This is an entity located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, on the campus of the University of Alabama, where I'm located. I can look out my window and look over in that general direction, and I can see the National Water Center. This was formed about 7 years ago to be able to centralize operational water prediction and provide reach back to the regional and local forecast centers and offices for the National Weather Service. And so this is the entity that we'll be working very closely with to translate research into operations, not only at the National Water Center, but then throughout the country in the regional offices and local offices. The second audience is NOAA itself. So broadening out a little bit from the National Water Center and trying to think of how research can be applied to things that may be beyond what the National Water Center is doing, helping to create a climate-ready nation to fit with the mission of NOAA. And then lastly, the other target audience is the overall water prediction or hydrologic science community, trying to build that community practice, align it and actually energize what is currently happening. There's a strong community of practice, but trying to provide it a bit of a energizing to be able to move forward with research initiatives, education, workforce development, outreach, and engagement. Now, there's 5 objectives that I want to highlight, and I'm going to go through them a little bit quickly, but just focus on the red parts that are highlighted as a key essence of what I want to get across with our objectives. We're really trying to focus on the next-gen national water model framework, which is coming out of the National Water Center. It's been developed over the past couple of years. Our emphasis for CIROH would be to help support the advancement of that framework. The second will be to try to facilitate community participation in that development of the next-gen national water model. And so serving as a steward of that community participation is going to be a key element of CIROH. A third one is to take research advances across a number of key areas, and this aligns with one of the third elements of of your annual science meeting theme, focusing on data and data advances, but really getting into artificial intelligence, hydrologic modeling, software development, heterogeneous computing, the things that are critical for delivering some of those advances into practice. And then the fourth part is very important, I think aligns with some of the other speakers on the panel this session this morning, is to have some synthesis and communication expertise and look at co-production of the water intelligence that's useful for communities, useful for building resilience, improving decision making, and guiding policy. And so the different things that we can do with not only advancing the delivery of the forecast, but co-producing how that forecast is communicated is going to be a key part of what we do with CIROH. So a key social sciences element within a computer science, data science, hydrologic science realm. Lastly, provide inclusive education and outreach will be a key thing, and really driving into operational applications. So really the knowledge to action as part of the curriculum as well in educational activities. CIROH will have 4 research themes following the life cycle, and I'll go into each of these for a minute or so, but I'll just quickly go through the life cycle, starting with the water prediction system, the inputs into the system, the modeling, step 2. Third part is the delivery of the prediction results and the hydroinformatics associated with that. And the fourth part, the decision support. And so those are where we've binned our research activities into 4 themes. The first one, to give you a little bit more detail of the first theme, advancing operational water prediction systems is the first theme. We'll have things like inputs and forcings, research related to satellite, sensors, drones, probabilistic meteorological forcings, and things like that, improving land surface modeling, integrating the hydrologic model with the NOAA Unified Forecast System, advancing data assimilation in water prediction, operational water prediction, which is a key area of need, working with ensembles, and then most importantly, proving the forecast and the value of that forecast with evaluation tools. The second research theme, building a community water model framework. I highlight framework in green there to really stress that concept. We basically are going to create, as the steward of the Next Gen National Water Model, create a digital twin of that modeling framework, which will be identical initially to the operational version of that of that modeling framework that the National Water Center employs. We will use that then to engage the community participation in advancing that model. That will have a community-governed software development lifecycle that is going to be focused on research to impact, because we will drive the research in the software development, what advances are being made, so that they can be incorporated into the next-gen national water model framework for operations. Taking advantage of things like heterogeneous computing, advancing hydrologic processes, integrating models and coupling, looking at things like water quality, coastal coupling, and even into the economic and social modeling as well. And then taking advantage of artificial intelligence and machine learning and integrative as well as standalone ways to improve water prediction. The third research theme will be hydroinformatics innovation. We'll be looking at different ways to package applications, apps that could be on the web that are not only applicable for researchers to give tools for researchers to drive some of the work, but also for users. And so there will be two types of application threads that we'll be advancing. Another one is different ways to communicate forecast products. So you see the graphic on the lower right. It shows the augmented reality, virtual reality ways to display information. And so we're going to try to push the envelope with different ways that users can interact with flood information compared to the traditional forecast products. Data and information sharing, getting more into real-time hydrologic information acquisition, flood inundation mapping, and then impact and risk assessment is all going to be supported through the hydroinformatics research theme. Research theme 4 is focused on the design of the forecast and building community resilience. This is the co-development, co-production part, where we'll be better understanding perceptions of risk, how users respond and interact to different types of forecast products, visual, verbal, etc. Understanding the value of that information to the users, working with a lot of different experimental ways to investigate this, games and charrettes and things along those lines, social impact and ecosystem services incorporated into the forecast, extending the forecast into those areas that may be more tangible and relevant to stakeholders and users. And then to improve forecasts in quote unquote hydro-blind areas that are underrepresented in terms of observations and modeling capacity. And this has been a key area for the National Water Center and their emphasis of trying to provide the national coverage at high resolution, and trying to advance that with improved observations at that scale is going to be another thing that we'll be working on with CIROH. Looking at it now, bringing it full circle, we've got the 4 research themes that are shown on the left of this graphic. The vision or for actionable water intelligence at the center, and then there's this part on the right, the climate ready nation, the vision and motivation for NOAA is going to involve education, outreach, and engagement. So we'll be trying to approach the achievement of actionable water intelligence from 2 sides. One, advancing the delivery, the research to advance the delivery of the operational water prediction, but also on the right side, how to advance the nation in being climate ready to use this information and to inform how that information is delivered. And so we'll have a wide range of things being done in education, outreach, and environment, or engaged related to summer programs, internship programs for students, curriculum, co-teaching opportunities across our consortium, a number of things related to the research community, an annual science meeting to drive the research there. And some of that we're going to be looking to do in partnership with the Global Water Futures. And so we're excited about that. Workshops for helping to advance next-gen national water model, visiting faculty fellowships and student fellowships that we're excited about, workforce development and training within NOAA, and some public outreach and activities with the the K through 12 education, and then lastly, economic development, the private sector partners, new applications for hydrologic forecasting, really growing an industry around water prediction to help advance water prediction, but also to spur economic development. That's going to be a key thing and one of the more unique features of this Cooperative Institute. Now, specifically, just to wrap up, the collaboration with the Global Water Futures, the 5 areas that I'd highlight, but this is in no means meant to be an exhaustive list, but just some of the things that, in speaking with Martin Clark and John Pomeroy and El Pietranero, we've come up with some areas of collaboration that we identified over the course of the next few years. So we'll be starting in a few focus areas to get launched, but definitely within the inputs, the model forecast, evaluation, there's going to be some areas that we see important. The community building and reaching out to the Canadian community, most importantly, will be a key area of collaboration. And then hydrologic modeling advances, taking advantage of the strength and strong foundation that's been built in Canada around the Global Water Futures, some hydroinformatics, decision support, and then some education outreach and engagement opportunities. And with that, I'll close out and say I look forward to joining you in person at the Global Water Futures 2023, and great to be with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you ever so much, Steve. Really appreciate it and excited about the collaboration opportunities that you're sharing as well. So look forward to continuing the discussion with the questions at the end of the session. And so with that, I'd like to invite Fabrice. We don't have Darcy here yet, so Fabrice Renaud will give us his presentation. And just to note, great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Corinne, and thank you very much for the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk to you here about factors that we need to consider to improve perhaps the acceptance of nature-based solutions in the context of reducing risks from hydrometeorological hazards. I would like to acknowledge also my co-author on this presentation, Carl Anderson, who is my colleague at the University of Glasgow. So why should we focus on hydrometeorological hazards specifically? I mean, this slide, you can see the global reported natural disasters from the 70s till 2019. And you can see the increasing trend in disasters up until the turn of this century, and then a stabilization. More importantly, perhaps what is flagrant from this slide is the fact that floods and extreme weather, drought, extreme temperatures represent the vast majority of the disasters that are reported globally. And actually, if we compare the 2 decades, so from the 1980s to 1999 and from 2000 to 2019, the incidence of disasters linked to extreme temperatures have been multiplied by 3.3, floods 2.3, landslide driven by excessive rainfall 1.5, etc. So hydrometeorological hazards have a real impact on communities, on infrastructure, and on the economy. That's the focus of this presentation on this. This is also going to be amplified by the consequences of climate change. This is taken from the latest IPCC report. And if we focus particularly on the part on the right, looking at heavy precipitation over land, it is clear that the frequency and increase in intensity of what they call heavy one-day precipitation events that occurred once in 10 years in a climate without human influence. So that's a reference point in the period 1850 to 1900. Well, this at the present is now occurring 1.3 times under a 1 degree Celsius warming. And for each increment of warming that are presented on this slide, the frequency and the intensity is going to increase drastically. So from 1.5 times with a 1.5 degrees Celsius to up to 2.7 times with a 4 degrees Celsius. So these issues are here. They're going to stay with us, unfortunately. And in order to protect ourselves from some of these hazards, there is a tendency to build engineered infrastructures. So I'm taking you here to a tropical landscape in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, where you can see a sea dike protecting the coastline against normal wave action, but also storm surges and perhaps tsunamis. Increasingly, though, nature-based solutions are being considered, and I'll go into a quick definition of this in the next slide. But basically here you can see the conservation and in many areas now the restoration of mangrove areas to protect these coastlines and provide other multiple ecosystem services. And you can, of course, have a mix of the two approaches here in the same landscape in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. You can see a combination of earthen sea dike and a mangrove that provide this protection to the coastal environment. So these nature-based solutions have been with us and been used for very, very long times, but have been discussed increasingly in the past 2-3 decades. And from the definition of the IUCN, we can see that these nature-based solutions are really to protect or conserve or restore our natural and modified ecosystems. And the key point here is that it's to address societal challenges. Some of these societal challenges are, for example, disaster risk reduction or climate change adaptation. And this is to provide both, obviously, human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So it's really to look at the complex human-environment interaction. There are many approaches that fall under this umbrella concept of nature-based solution. And from the list that you can see here, you probably will recognize some that you are either working with or that you've heard about. So for example, if we take issue-specific ecosystem-related approaches, this is where ecosystem-based adaptation or ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction will fall under. In the context of your event, you would see that under ecosystem-based management approaches, integrated water resources management is also considered a nature-based solution. Why is there an increased focus on these nature-based solutions? Is that in addition to providing the protection that you require for natural hazard, there is a provision of multiple other ecosystem services. For example, if you continue with the mangroves, you will have a huge amount of carbon that can be stored into these systems. It will also contribute to erosion regulation, environmental hazard regulations, and reduce the exposure of communities. But it will also provide provisioning services in terms of fish, seafood, timber, of course, if you use them in a sustainable manner. And also they will have cultural and recreational values. So this is why they are being considered more and more in terms of reducing risk from hydro-meteorological hazards. But there are many bottlenecks still remaining in terms of their implementation and uptake globally. I've put some of them here on the left-hand column. The ones in bold are the ones I'm going to be discussing a bit more in the next slides. But if you take the second line, lack of guidelines or decision support systems for implementation, well, actually now this is perhaps not so much a problem anymore, because in the last 2 decades, there has been a rapid development of guideline publications for the development of these solutions. And it's the same with the demonstration of the economic evidence. New approaches have been developed, particularly to capture the intangible benefits and also the putting a value on all the other ecosystem services that these measures can provide. So looking at the scientific evidence part of it, there are many publications that have shown such trends in the number of published work on nature-based solution or some of the specific approaches that I've mentioned before. This is taken from a review I was involved with and that was led by Dr. Corinne and that was published last year, where we looked at specific ecosystems such as urban ecosystems, coastal ecosystems, and mountain ecosystems that are affected by various hazards, and reviewed what was deployed in terms of nature-based solution and how effective these nature-based solutions may have been at reducing certain risks such as floods, such as forest fires, coastal hazards, etc. And the number of publications that we looked at the review, it clearly increases very rapidly in the last decade. We've put here a few benchmarks. It doesn't necessarily mean that there is a cause-effect relationship here, but there were a lot of discussions and increased uptake in nature-based solutions after the dramatic Indian Ocean tsunami, for example. and this is where greater interest has taken place. In terms of proving the scientific evidence, so from the review that was conducted in this piece of research, for each paper that was reviewed, we looked at the level of evidence that was provided in the paper. So, for example, is it just a case study, is it just expert judgment, or is it complex physical modeling, or even long-term monitoring? And also, we looked at the level of agreement. So that's where the reviewer would agree that the case had been made in the paper that the nature-based solution in consideration had indeed reduced the risk with a specific hazard. And we can see, if we look at the matrix on the right, that gives you a reading about the level of confidence, which is the intersection of the level of evidence and agreement. We can see that, for example, for the economics cases, so are the nature-based solutions cost-effective, there is a very high confidence that this is the case. When we look at nature-based solutions deployed, for example, in urban environments, we're in a high confidence area because there has been many nature-based solutions deployed in these environments, particularly to reduce flooding and also address water pollution issues. For others, the level of evidence needs to be strengthened in the future in order to be able to provide a scientific basis for justifying their deployment. It's also important to be able to capture how these nature-based solutions reduce risks. In the figure you have on the right, you will see a classical equation, if you will, of risk, where you have risk as a function of the hazard, the exposure, and the vulnerability. And if you do not have a framework that allows you to showcase how nature-based solutions can actually reduce the hazard intensity or frequency, or reduce the exposure and reduce the vulnerability, it's going to be very difficult to showcase or to prove how they are working. So it's important to develop these frameworks that capture, in addition to the social and economic components, for example, the ecosystem components, and the newer frameworks that look at social ecological systems do a better job at this. And you can use these frameworks then to show the effectiveness of some of the solutions that you're deploying in terms of reducing risk. This is taken from the Operandum project that I'm involved with, and colleagues in Italy in the Po Delta have developed an NBS where they are planting deep-rooted grass on a riverbank in order to strengthen it and prevent it from breaching. And by using indicators, we can show the top row shows various components of risks without the NBS, and the bottom row shows the various components of risk with the NBS. So we can see immediately that, for example, in terms of reducing the hazard intensity, the NBS has a great effect with some of the regions along the river being less affected by the flooding events. It translates also into the exposure term. I haven't put the vulnerability term here, but we're still analyzing this. But overall, if you look at the two pictures on the right, you can see that the risk is reduced by having this NBS in place that avoids the breaching of the embankment. Another important component is the time dimension that is to consider a nature-based solution. So on the y-axis of this figure, you would have a risk level, and on the x-axis, you would have time. And as you are deploying an NBS, and of course it varies dramatically on the type of NBS you're deploying, it has a lag between the deployment or the implementation of the NBS and the time where it can provide the maximum disaster risk reduction capacity of this NBS. And this is sometimes problematic in terms of, if you have a problem, you want to find a solution. And if you have to wait 20 years for an NBS to mature, for example, you probably have to find intermediary solutions to try to solve the problem. And also in temperate climates, you may have a variability with the seasons in terms of the effectiveness of the NBS, and this needs to be captured. So once we understand these processes in depth, it's easier to provide additional solutions. So for example, include engineering solutions and go with a hybrid solution in that case, while the NBS is maturing, therefore providing the best of two worlds, i.e. a more rapid risk reduction and in the longer term, perhaps a more sustainable system in place. Now, I'm basing this figure is based on the work of Carl Anderson, that is linked to a case study in the UK in Cartline Bay, that is a small village that is exposed to landslides, and with houses at the top of a hill that can be affected by the landslides, and also a road at the bottom of the hill that is negatively affected by the landslides. These landslides are triggered by increased precipitation events and storm surges. And there are various nature-based solutions that are being put in place there in order to reduce this landslide risk, like live crib walls, live pole drains, or hybrid solution, which is live ground anchors. And in focus group discussions with some of the community members of this area, Carl was talking about various factors that would influence their perception of the solutions that are available for them in order to reduce the risk. So from the gray or engineered infrastructure solutions to the hybrid to the green solutions, which would be the NBS. And what is interesting in this slide is the fact that having the evidence base is very important, and community members feel that the evidence base is much stronger for the engineering and gray infrastructure. So that pushes the preference for a gray risk reduction measure. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the cost implication of deploying these risk reduction measures. And here, the green and nature-based solutions are much more cost effective than the gray. And of course, all these factors interact with each other. This is what the dotted lines represent. And you can see which factors push the preferences towards gray infrastructure, which factors push a preference towards green infrastructure, and in the middle towards hybrid infrastructure. And the time that I mentioned before is clearly one that pushes a preference towards hybrid infrastructure. So in order to look at public acceptance and increase perhaps the public acceptance towards a nature-based solution, it's important to address many key factors. And this is a public acceptance of nature-based solutions framework that was developed by Carl, and that shows 4 recommendations that you can see towards at the bottom of the graph. So provide benefits, increase awareness of benefits, communicate effectively, and promote participation and collaboration. And for each of these recommendations, you have 4 corresponding success criteria. In terms, for example, if you look at provide benefits, you will have to look at the multifunctional characteristics of the NBS and emphasize this. So the multiple ecosystem services that I was mentioning earlier. You have to ensure equity, meaning a redistribution of the benefits for the communities at large. If you look at the evidence base, well, you can generate this evidence through experimentations locally, or through setting up long-term monitoring systems that we show the communities that the nature-based solution is working for what it was designed. And all this is motivated by key influencing factors, which you see at the top of the figure. These are only examples. It's not exhaustive what's on this figure, in order to increase public acceptance. And as I mentioned before, issues such as effectiveness, cost, risk perception, and trust are in the people who are deploying the NBSs are very important. So to finish, nature-based solutions are being increasingly considered and deployed globally. There are many examples, and not only limited to the scientific community, i.e. through research projects, but through government projects, and also projects deployed by communities themselves or non-governmental organizations. We have to, when we're talking about disaster risk reduction, we have to constantly emphasize the risk reduction measure that you want to achieve, and then and only then talk about the additional ecosystem services. Their effectiveness in terms of reducing risk is increasingly demonstrated in many different contexts and geographies, but there is more research that is required for some specific context. The nature-based solutions, of course, are not a solution to every single problem, and they will only be successful if you understand comprehensively the biophysical, social, economic, and cultural context that you're working under, and also the climate change impacts that this will have on the hazard characteristics, for example. It's very important to have all the stakeholders on board. So you talk a lot about co-creation, co-design, co-creation, co-deployment, and co-monitoring with the concerned communities when you're trying to work with these nature-based solutions. It's very important, and it's rarely done, to have long-term monitoring in place, because you really want to make sure that the efficiencies in reducing risk is sustainable and in the long term. And also that transparent reporting is needed. So, for example, if one nature-based solution in one locality does not work, that this is being communicated broadly so that these are not replicated or are replicated differently in different contexts. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fabrice. Much appreciated, and a great couple of presentations from you and Steve in terms of the modeling and forecasting, and then the nuts and bolts of some of the practical solutions that we can implement as a result. Our last speaker of the day is Nadia. And Nadia is also newly appointed to the University of British Columbia, which I didn't note earlier. So Nadia, you're going to take us beyond risk reduction. So the floor is yours.
Lovely, thank you. And just to double check, can you confirm that you can hear me all right? I expect it was much of the work there that brought me into this invitation to share and present some of my experiences. But many of you also know me as Nadia Jo, and as Corinne mentioned, in my current role, I comprise one half of UBC's newly established climate emergency team. So UBC declared a climate emergency declaration that was really driven by the love, the leadership of UBC students and several faculty and staff. And it's a responsibility I, of course, don't carry alone. I share part of the role with a co-manager, but it is a distributed responsibility across the campus in helping to advance UBC's ambitious but ever necessary climate response. And so much of the work that we do there focuses on creating connections and building community among all partners that are working towards a just and sustainable future, both on and off campus. So thanks again for this introduction. Thanks to the people who have done the heavy lifting to bring us together, and many expressions of gratitude to Chris for your patience and grace as you met in responses. So it's of course wonderful to be among so many people who care deeply about water and about justice. And it's a privilege to share this platform with such distinguished water scholars and water warriors. So prior to joining UBC in September, I worked predominantly in the field of water co-management and watershed governance. And my path into this was to a request that I'd received from several elders in my community who had asked me when I was initiating my graduate research to quite simply focus my studies on learning how do we as Indigenous people learn to protect our waters. And so to give you a little bit of framing and context, I think it's important that you understand first a little bit about my community that I was raised in and how that's influenced the work that I do, but more importantly, the stories that I've learned to tell. Because as our planet confronts the reality of what code red for humanity signals for each of us, it's simply not enough to engage just our mind and our intellect and our cognition in understanding our world and our place in it. What we need is to learn and to relearn the practices and the stories that activate our creative, our imaginative, our visionary, and perhaps even our hopeful capacities. It is the practices that reorient us towards the care for the health and well-being of our planet and all living communities that depend on it. So in my bio, I had written that I was raised by a river, and this is true on both fronts. I was raised by the Collecture River, which really was the source of my most enduring lessons from a childhood spent with my grandparents on the land. My grandparents still lived a fairly traditional lifestyle, living off the grid and making their annual harvesting rounds, where they'd go to fish camp in the summertime and head to their trap lines in the winter. And it was here on the land where they had taught me what it meant to give back, what it meant to show gratitude for what I had received and for what I had taken. They had taught me what it meant to live within the limits of what my environment could sustain. But these weren't just bush skills or survival skills that they were teaching me. The lessons were really about teaching me my responsibilities to my family, to my clan, and to all of my communities, both human and non-human relations. They were teaching me how to be what we call dun sho dun, or a good person on the land and in relation with each other. And I recall that because our lands not only sustained our communities, they shaped our cultures, they shaped our relationships and the stories that we needed to continue to tell if our children were to have a future. And the backdrop to my childhood was this incredibly dynamic time for us politically as Indigenous peoples. The legal landscape was shifting rapidly under our feet, and it was out of this time when the leaders of 14 of the nations in the Yukon came together to tell their stories to each other. And what emerged from these narratives was titled Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And they presented this document on Valentine's Day in 1973 to Prime Minister Trudeau, the images of the flooding in the Nicola Valley. And shortly after my aunt's 77th birthday, I called her up to ensure that she was doing all right, and not only that, but to invite her to come and stay with us. My aunt still lives very independently on the Joyaska Reserve, which is just slightly above Merritt, BC, the area that was essentially devastated by the flooding. And it was not only impacted by the floods, but within the span of 4 months, they had been subject to several evacuation alerts, several evacuation orders, originating in June with the risks of wildfire, with the risks of smoke. And my invitations to my aunt quickly became desperate pleas and well-reasoned arguments for her to leave the lands that her father had spent a lifetime working on, to leave the lands that were, of course, subject to numerous intersect with multiple dimensions of injustice. In the face of overwhelming evidence that our world is hurtling towards a future with irreversible and catastrophic consequences, we know the suffering will not be borne equally. And so reducing the risks of climate change and water-related risks cannot be achieved focusing just on policy and technology changes. Effective risk reduction must also bend towards justice, and we must also work and this means learning to tell us with stark clarity the harm that has been caused by this narrative of unlimited growth, rooted in an unrestrained colonial and capitalist paradigm. It has also made visible the inherent interconnectivity of all the systems, social, economic, political, cultural, and the ways the various policies enacted within one system have ripple effects among all others. As we're returning to redefining our places in the world into this new reality, is it possible for us to reimagine our systems with new stories that can guide our ways of being and relating to each other? And what are the values that would be reflected here? At the onset of the pandemic here in BC, I was initially really encouraged by witnessing this incredible rallying of our country's leaders to coordinate this historic and collective response. I felt reinvigorated by knowing that we hadn't yet lost our ability to rally around a cause for the greater good. And here in BC, the message emanating from our provincial government was really embodied in our provincial health officers' invitation to resilience inherent within our natural systems, that the earth does not need us to save her. She only needs us to respect her. But the narrative didn't last that long. And the short-lived ecological gains were quickly eroded. Here in BC, mining, oil, and gas, of course, were quickly established as essential services, where essential services are, of course, defined as those daily services essential to preserving life, public safety, and basic societal functioning. They are the services British Columbians come to rely on in their daily lives. So the story that continues to define us then, as now, centers economic imperatives above the health of people and the planet. And of course, patterns of profiteering are not new or unique, and the framing of these unsustainable extractive practices as essential to preserving life, health, public safety, and basic societal functioning, I fear, maintains the most dangerous narrative for the fate of our planet going forward, because it is a story that further entrenches extraction and unsustainable economic growth, again, as the pinnacle to aspire to. And so in a light of the moment we find ourselves in, with parallel pandemics of racism, of fascism, of COVID-19, it is a moment in time that we must continue to question how we've done things in the past and challenge ourselves to take the risks to reimagine the futures we can have together. To imagine what would it mean in your research, in your scholarship, to shift away from the stories, the narratives of unsustainable extraction, energy extraction, and consumption practices, and instead reshift towards a future that considers and centers the health and well-being of our water and everything that sustains. Because by abandoning our responsibility to change the current trajectory we're on, we're effectively denying our children the right to be children. And if we get this wrong, then nothing else matters. So in conclusion, to invite you on perhaps a new story. In my culture, when you've done good work, you were compensated with a story, and this was a metaphor. The stories were quite literally understood to be the source of our wealth. And the practice of telling our stories was not only to preserve our culture, but it helped us to imagine our future. And so I'm a child of the people of the potlatch. And as of last year, I no longer have any living relatives who remember dancing before the potlatch ban in Canada was lifted. And so for those of you who don't know, our potlatches were our gatherings, our ability to come together and celebrate, to engage in healing, to be able to grieve together, and to be able to practice dreaming through songs and through dances. And in Canada, these, of course, were banned from 1885 to 1951. And these gatherings of our people are the places for our stories and our ceremonies to come alive through dance, symbolically emphasizing relationships of reciprocity and cooperation. They clarified our intention towards each other and sealed our shared commitments and responsibilities to each other and to our lands. And these were and they continue to be the rituals that embody. We know, we see what the exclusion of Indigenous peoples from decisions over our lands, our waters, and our communities has proven catastrophic, not only to our world, but to the world that we all inhabit. And so restoring our waters and reducing risk for the communities most vulnerable to the effects of climate change will mean restoring the landscapes with the stories, the language, and the practices that renew our collective ways of being and living in relationship to the land and to each other. We need to continue to search for the stories that matter and the stories that can help us restore and restore our planet. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Nadia. Really appreciated. And thank you for the hope and for reminding us that that connection to the land and the waters is going to be really, really important for us. I would like to invite all of you back, and we will move now to a broader question and answer. So again, those in the audience, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. And I'd like to start us off while we're waiting to talk about one of the themes that came out that I'm absolutely thrilled about as a water health researcher and someone who looks at local water security and insecurity, and that's the importance of people. And so talked about, Steve, the community engaged model framework. Fabrice, you talked about the risk perceptions and the social, cultural, and economic context for appropriate solutions. And Nadia talked about our connection with and respect for the environment and others. And also know that people are important because it's their lives, their livelihoods, it's our health, it's the social fabrics that are at risk when we're talking about water-related hazards. And Nadia reminded us that these risks are not equally distributed. And even within a given event, what we need to remember is that people, families, communities have different levels of resilience, resources, social safety nets available that either ameliorate or exacerbate their individual impacts. And so I guess my, first question to you as a group is that given that people are so important and we need to engage people and we need to translate research into action and impact because it's for the benefit of people as well and the environment. What do you see as some of the key mechanisms required, and where does the responsibility? Who else would you? Municipal governments. There are all kinds of different communities that we could and should engage with, and so then the question becomes, how do we nest these? And as you say, it's very real. A lot of community members that I engage with, it's not their main job. And so recognizing that reciprocity and recognizing what we get out of it as researchers, and yes, hopefully we're helping communities to answer problems, to develop tools that will benefit them, but as individuals, making sure that equity is there in terms of that their services are compensated and that we aren't going to the same people all the time. There's a lot that's built into that as well, and yet we do need mechanisms to bring all of the stakeholders and rights holders to the tables and give them equal voice, because I think that's another challenge that we have, both as individuals and but also different groups are either listened to more or less and or don't feel comfortable speaking up in the same ways. Nadia, I think you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, and thank you, Corinne. And I just wanted to reiterate and be really intentional around the language that we use around community work. And a lot of it is perceived as we're going in to give Indigenous people things, to give Indigenous people benefit. And I want to come back to this point, this quote from the Indigenous leader Nemonti Nemkima around recognizing that Indigenous people we do not need anyone to save us. We simply need people to respect us, to respect the voices, the stories, the knowledge that are here, and work to repair those relationships that have been fractured through the legacy of colonization that we're operating under. And so ensuring that we're very intentional and pay attention to the language that we have when we're going to community, recognizing that why we're doing it. It's not to give Indigenous people power or knowledge. It's to repair relationships that have been fractured and learn from and learn with and learn together about ways of being on the land that will have better outcomes for climate, for justice, for sustainability.
Absolutely. And again, audience, feel free to break into our conversation, but otherwise we're going to keep going because Fabrice, you were talking about that expanded watershed-based approach, if I can sort of shift your language a little bit, but the fact that we need to understand what's happening upstream versus downstream, particularly when these watersheds cross jurisdictional boundaries. And so, we've also noted biophysical, Steve, you were talking about having people from different partners from different parts of the United States to be able to recognize those different environmental and climate perspectives, and to be able to bring those in to the models. And so, can we measure water-related risk comprehensively? Should we be trying to? Should we be continuing with some kind of siloed flood, drought, whatever? And if the answer is that yes, we should be trying to be more comprehensive and more integrated in our risk reduction and risk management, do you have any ideas on where we start? And I think if you answer that second part of my question, then maybe we'll all be rich because we'll have solved a really critical problem. But how do we go about this? Should we even be going about this?
If you want, I can start, Corinne. I don't know.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is yes, we should go about this. And it's simply also because if you stay in your silos, any adaptation measures or risk reduction measure you may take to reduce one type of risk may lead to maladaptation in terms of another risk. So you may, just to give a simple example, you may reduce drastically the risk to flooding, but you might have in the process increase your risk for drought or for another type of hazard. So you really have to look and understand the system in detail to ensure that what you do well on the one hand is not detrimental on the other. Because also in many cases, you're going to find that the people who are affected by one aspect of a hazard might not be affected by another. And if you shift this, then you're affecting other people, other communities, other segments of society in a negative way. So definitely you have to do that. And you also have to look at the consequences of what you do in one location, that you don't transfer the risk somewhere else in the landscape in the long run. So you really have to understand the systems very well. And that's why it's very important to have interdisciplinary teams working on these issues, not only in the scientific sense of the term, but working with all the knowledge systems that are available to try to provide the most adapted solution.
Yes, and by system, then it's, as you say, the biophysical, the natural system, but also the human, the social, cultural, political, economic, collectively. Nadia, Steve, anything to add?
I'll go ahead. If not, Nadia did not open her mic, so I'll go ahead and go and fumble my way through this one as well. I think about this, and the knowledge to action, and that's in many ways thought of as two different parties, the knowledge generators and research and education, and then the action, the practitioners, the communities. And there's challenges as you go to different layers of complexity. You can think of in the education realm, you're talking interdisciplinary, and that's been a challenge for education to evolve to accommodate that shift. And same in communities. Once you go out beyond there's the silos in communities or those that are in practice, the same challenges exist. I think there's people that are moving forward. One thing that is to me not always clear, and this is from an education research standpoint, are the tools that can help facilitate this collaboration at a higher level. And then also the different modes of how you train students and prepare students to enter into a workforce that you're trying to shift from being a siloed workforce into a more integrated workforce. I think looking back at the CIROH program that we're starting up, the National Water Center was envisioned to be this cross-disciplinary entity that would bring people together in this forecast realm, which was a different paradigm from the previous forecast centers, which were very much operational hydrologists and meteorologists and climate scientists. And so this idea is the foundation of where the National Water Center evolved. It's still working towards that and figuring out how do you deliver operations that incorporate all of those disciplinary perspectives at a national scale, which is very, very difficult. And so I think there's a lot of research opportunities to try to figure out how to do that. But I think there are these movements in that direction from an educational institution in that knowledge creation area, but also in the practice area within operational centers on how they become more, how they deal with more complex problems and situations than what go across the silos.
Agreed. Nadia, do you have anything to add?
Nothing specifically. I mean, I think it's still surprising to me to recognize and understand a lot of the work that we're doing to address these risks is happening in silos, and I expect I'm still quite naive in that regard, because when I look at the challenges that communities face, that my communities face, that communities I've worked with faced, it is those systemic barriers that need to be addressed, and when we look at mitigating some of these responses for flood, for drought, and you look at how the decisions were made for Indigenous communities to be positioned in floodplains, we need to address that. This is part of the reconciliation process as part of the work that needs to happen in identifying how was this decision made to move these communities into these areas that we're going to put them in harm's way. And so that needs to necessarily be part of the solution and part of our understanding around how do we address water-related risks.
Thank you very much. We're just about at time. There was one question from the audience, and it was to Fabrice, and it was asking about whether nature-based solutions could also be used for environmental remediation, for example, using constructed wetlands for treating contaminants, and whether that would fall under this category. And Fabrice, unfortunately, the chat that we have is just for us. So I've noted that you've said yes. So that's Fabrice's answer. I don't know if you'd like to expand on it quickly.
Yes, and I can expand a little bit on it in the sense that if you remember the definition of nature-based solutions that I gave is that they are there to address societal challenges. And I mentioned two: disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, but actually water and food security are also societal challenges recognized there. So anything that would improve the water security of a community through the use of ecosystem-based approaches would be considered a nature-based solution. The constructed wetlands, therefore, by allowing to improve the water quality and therefore providing more readily available freshwater resources to anyone, to the ecosystems, but also, of course, to humans, would therefore be considered a nature-based solution.
And so with that, Fabrice, you've had the last word, and I'd like to thank all three of you for bringing your diverse perspectives together, but demonstrating the common themes of people, of transdisciplinarity, of community engagement, whether Indigenous and non-Indigenous, doesn't matter what community, but really appreciate your insights and your questions and the questions that you're still searching answers to. And hopefully together we can move forward and continue to work towards risk reduction, risk mitigation, and particularly for the most vulnerable and the people. The Sustainable Development Goals say it all: no one left behind. So with that, thank you very much, Steve, Fabrice, Nadia. Really appreciate it. Hope that you as the audience have enjoyed it, and thank you very much. And we'll see you in about half an hour for the next session. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.